Welcome to the Growth Whisperers Podcast, where everything we talk about is building enduring great companies. Because that's just what Brad and I both enjoy doing, seeing companies grow and get better as they get bigger and have a better impact on our world. I'm Kevin Lawrence, and joined today, as I am for every show, with my great partner, Brad Giles. Brad, how you doing?
Excellent, thank you. Very good today. Very good. Spring in my town, just starting to warm up, so I'm good.
Nice. And we got the other way. We're getting winter, so it's getting a little cooler. It was really chilly here today. I mean, not really chilly. And as I drove through the mountains the other night, Saturday morning, there was a little bit of snow on the road. So the seasons have changed. We get into exciting times through the mountain passes now. So what's your word of the day today, Brad? Actually, no, what are we going to talk about today? We'll talk about the word in a second. Yes. What's the name of the game today?
Yeah, today we're talking about the dangerous thing about focusing on your competition. There is a dangerous thing if you're going to focus on your competition. What is it?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. It's probably going to be trouble. We'll dig into that. So, word of the day.
Hull. So a good boat hull. The difference between a good boat hull and a bad boat hull, and I don't know much about boat hulls, but I know enough to have a go at it. The difference between a good and a bad boat hull is its ability to consistently endure rough seas. And so translating that back into a good business, you can have the best skipper that you want, but it's the ability to navigate rough seas. That's what's on my mind at the moment. The kind of the parallel between a boat hull and a good business. And what about yourself? Word or phrase of the day?
My phrase is productive paranoia.
Ooh.
It's one of my favorites because Jim Collins had me realize that my paranoia made me more capable and not crazy. And as I think about it, I go back into crossing the mountain passes because I go back and forth now probably every week between this place called the Okanagan, like 3-4 hours from here, and Vancouver. And, on my vehicle, I have, it's a truck I use to go up into the mountains for snow biking and winter sports. So it's a truck that's lighter in the back. So I've got sandbags in the back. I've got a 24 or 36 hour emergency bag. They have the best snow tires you can get, and they're studded with little steel things sticking out, so it'll even have grip on ice. It's like I'm good no matter what. And and I know some people that don't think about those things, but it was interesting. I had a conversation with a couple buddies that were very successful entrepreneurs, and they all operate fairly similarly. They have that similar type of paranoia, and productive paranoia is things that you're concerned about, and then you drive into action and do something about it. So it's like you don't just observe risks, you actively mitigate them all, so you can just get on your way and do what you got to do. So productive, the hull of productive paranoia. Do you got a way to weave those two together there, Brad?
No, I was waiting to see how you're going to weave them together.
I just had like the hull of, but that's all we really got today. So why don't we jump right in? So this thing about focusing on your competition can be very dangerous. And I'll tell you, it is, as you and I were talking, realized how little energy we actually put into competition. And we have, as you and I had a conversation, we're talking about when you're building out a strategy, you got to be tuned into the market and the competition and what they're doing. But in most companies that we work with, we don't have to, we try not to spend too much time on it because it can be one, a waste of time, and two, dangerous. Now, we're not saying not to do it. You do need to be aware of them. But the idea is a lot of people start to really stay overly in tune with their competition, and it can get them in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, when we were talking about preparing for this episode, we were toying with the idea of calling it, are you spending too much time thinking about your competition and not enough time thinking about your customers? But that's a bit long for a title.
Yeah. And we'll get it, but that's kind of the theme that we're weaving into this here today. Yeah. But it starts with, if you consume your extra thinking time thinking about your competition, there's going to be nothing left to think about your darn customers. So the first point here is the distinction between understanding your competition or being aware of, which is really analyzing their strengths and their weaknesses and maybe, opportunity, almost like a SWOT on your competition versus focusing on and obsessing about. And that's an important distinction. Appropriate awareness versus almost obsessed with and spending your extra discretionary time thinking about them and or worrying about them.
Yeah. Your competition should form a part of your strategic analysis. Think about it like this. If you have a quarterly strategic planning day, it should form an agenda item within that. And that you should be using tools to assess them and what they're doing and what they're not. It should maybe form part of the conversation that you're having with customers. We spoke about the 4Q before, the 4 questions in episode 78. But, there should be a limit on it, because then once you understood and have used the tools to understand, let's say, the playing field, or understand where the competition are and what they're doing, that's when you can shift over to think about the customer's needs.
Yeah. And I might even argue that you don't even need to talk about them every quarter in some cases. Every business is different. So I'm not saying if it's working for you, keep doing it. But for most of the companies that we work with, we're not even tracking the competition quarterly. We may look at it at an annual. And again, it depends. Some business models have more sensitivity around it. But the point of it isn't, and that's point number one, that the thing the second point here is that the first point is, so basically you need to understand them and be aware of them because they're part of the environment. But the second, the real danger is if you put too much attention, you start to follow them and you'll start to become a me too company. And this is how people commoditize their own business and decrease their own gross margin and decrease their own net income, because they start to get commoditized by following the competition and, the competition's doing it, so we should do it too. And that's the danger of paying too much attention to them. And I've seen a lot of companies fall into that. They give up or destroy their own competitive advantage.
Yeah, and that's really the key to the title of this episode. The dangerous thing about focusing on your competition is that you can begin to emulate what they're doing, and then you're always playing catch up, or you haven't carved out your own strategy, and then it's just a horrible race to the bottom. And of course, profits are significantly affected in a commoditized market like that. So it's not that you don't need to not know what they're doing, but you've got to be able to differentiate. Are you obsessing, or are you spending too much time beyond a specific disciplined allocated amount of time that you should in analyzing and understanding them to carve out your own niche?
Yes, and that would be the key thing, Brad, is if you're thinking about them and then looking at how to differentiate, if you're looking at them, understand they're going left so that you can go right, that's different. We're talking about you're following them, and it would and this is the danger of, as I recently teaching my daughter how to drive. If you're in traffic and you just start to follow the taillights of the car in front of you, you're in danger, because you don't get time to react. You need to be looking 5-10 cars ahead.
Yeah.
And when the car 10 cars ahead steps on their brakes, you start to slow down. Otherwise, if you just get tunnel vision and follow the car in front of you, you're going to smash right into them because you won't have enough time to respond. And that's what happens. And metaphorically, people get that kind of tunnel vision and just start following the taillights of the competitors. It's not good. You're here to do your own game. Again, my background in racing cars. You're observing those other cars, but I'm looking way past them because I'm running my game. I'm not going to follow them in theirs.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a time when it's almost like when you go on autopilot. And again, bad strategy is autopilot. And you're supposed to be going somewhere, but then you follow your normal route home when you're actually supposed to be going to meet friends for dinner somewhere else. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, no one will admit to having done that before. That's for sure.
Oh gosh, no, never. Never more than once a year. Yeah.
And another way to think about it is that a wolf doesn't worry about the opinions of sheep. Now that's a bit of a brutal way to look at it, but you know, you've got to understand what the competitors are doing. But if you're building a unique and valuable strategy that is different from your competitors, understand what they're doing, and then come back and relentlessly focus on your customers.
So that would be the summary, Brad. If you're paying attention to your customers, it's to get data to improve your strategy and your differentiation.
Yeah.
If you find that paying attention to your customers is making you replicate what they're doing, unless your strategy is to knock them off and be a cheaper version of them, which normally isn't a good strategy. But if that is your strategy, okay, maybe let them be your R&D and then you leverage it. But for most people, they want to try and create differentiation, not similar. I was going to say similarization, but that's not a word. You don't want to commoditize yourself. Cool.
Yeah.
So the third point is going to, enough attention on your customers to give you differentiation and understanding. But then 80% of your energy on your customers, understanding their current and their future needs better than anyone else. And that's really plugged into them. And it goes back to that 4Q conversation we talked about, as you mentioned in episode 78. But truly understanding what they need and what they wish they had that they may not even have told you yet. And, to quote the late, great Steve Jobs, no one ever said they wanted an iPod. Nobody ever asked for one. But he was able to understand what people were using in their world when it came to music and potentially not using, and triangulate it, and maybe a few special psychedelics mixed together, and he ended up with this vision of this thing called an iPod. But that's a great place to hang out and spend time, and sometimes people just don't do enough, and that is a valuable place to obsess.
Yeah. So what we're saying here is, like many of the concepts, the Pareto rule, it just plugs in so nicely. So yes, if we were forced to put a discipline around this, why don't we say, let's use the Pareto rule and think, don't spend more than 20% of your time thinking about the competition. If you're spending 10 or whatever, that's fine.
I would say 2. Yeah, 20 is way too much. I know if you want to stick to the Pareto thing, but 20 is way too much.
Yeah. But we want to find some kind of discipline, because I can tell you, some people in some businesses, it would be flipped. They'd be spending 80% of their time thinking about the competitors and 20 or less thinking about the customer.
I believe you, Brad. I think that's just, unless there's some unique reason why they need to.
And this is all of the time. This is not just the time within an agenda at a strategic offsite meeting. Let's be clear about that. It's also the time where there's informal chats over the water cooler, where we're talking all about that time. I got it. It's all of the stuff in the day-to-day running of the business.
I vote for 2%.
Yeah,
maximum 2% of time on the customer. No, not on the customer. On the competition.
Yeah, and that might be reasonable, but just think about, for a listener, think about how much time in total of all of the time that you spend on the subjects, how much is spent on the competition. You want to make it as little as possible after you understand them. Then moving on to number 4, once we have reduced our time spent thinking about our competition, and we instead spend more time focusing on the customer's needs. Remember that commoditization is what we're trying to avoid here, right? So we're understanding the customer's needs, then we can dedicate time to improving our systems to enable better customer experience. So how can we meet those customer needs better than any other organization?
Yeah, and with the least amount of friction and or cost in the system, which will also benefit your own efficiency and profitability. It likely has spillover benefits onto your team. And this is where the whole thing about lean and Six Sigma and process improvement comes from. You stand in the shoes of the customer on the receiving end of the experience, and you think about, okay, how do we make this notably easier and or less time consuming, less mistakes, less whatever it happens to be. It's the ultimate way to streamline our systems. Unfortunately, as companies grow and get more complex, we get more caught up in looking at it from our own perspective, because we have people that are crying and screaming and frustrated about things that we have that don't work. And we get caught up in that versus going back to the customer shoes. And yes, we need to do both. But even if you want to streamline something for your customer service team, it should be done from the perspective of the customer. And then the customer wins, the team wins, and the profitability or effectiveness of the company wins too.
Yeah. So that's about our systems, and also it's about our products and services. Let's go back to that Pareto rule, and maybe think about 80% of our, 20% of our products and services, are they meeting the need as much as they could, or 80%? Just really thinking about how, if we understand our customers' need, are we selling it just because the competitors were, or in actual fact, could those products and services, maybe they're not relevant, or maybe there are parts of them that would be more valuable to more customers?
Yeah, for example, we just had our annual retreat with our team, and as the 10 of us went through and worked on our strategy and think about, we produced a report with a number of our clients that we're only providing one of the solutions that we have. And over the years, we've built a bunch of additional solutions that a lot of the clients probably don't even know about.
Yeah.
And the pains that growing companies have are similar, common pains. And we just realized is that for someone, we just need to make sure they're aware, hey, if you need help with this, then we can help you. But everyone's so busy doing their job, we often forget to go back and, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, here's what's possible. Because people are just, trying to get the existing stuff completed and across the line. So yeah, thinking about the existing products and services you have, maybe there's additional products and services, and how can you do that? Because generally, I had it noted in our prep notes here. Where did it go?
I don't know, but while you're looking for that, the other thing is about our employees. So yes, it may be worth considering pausing, taking a moment and listening to the types of conversations that employees are having, and trying to think how much of the time that our teams spend is spent on talking about the competitors compared to talking about our customers. And
that would be interesting.
Yeah, like thinking about that, maybe in the leadership team, maybe in the mid-management or other teams, other areas. But if you were just to observe, pause, how much of your team's time is actually spent talking about competitors or talking about the customer's needs, and not customers' complaints?
Yes, exactly. Beyond that, above that, by the way, as we're talking this, I'm going, I bet you there is some companies who probably do need to pay a little bit more attention to the competitors. But I would imagine most would probably need to pay more attention, I would guess, more towards from experience of other clients, more on the needle towards customers. Yeah. Because we get caught up in the day-to-day, and instead of zooming out and looking at what are the other needs or things that we could help at a macro level. And Michael Dell, I just listened to a great podcast with him, but Michael Dell used to call this reading the tea leaves. He used to do this in the earlier days of Dell. He would take all the customer feedback and kind of spread it out and try and find patterns. And this is before we had kind of word clouds and all of those things. But he would look for the common patterns of the positives and the negatives the customers were thinking to help him figure out what he needed to do in his business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to understand what's happening with the customer. I mean, the customer pays the bills, and sometimes they come second fiddle to politics or to gossip or things that we hear.
Or even broken systems or flawed processes. At the end of the day, it's easy to get sucked into the drama or obsession with their competitors. It's easy to get sucked into the drama of broken or inefficient systems and processes or issues in the company. And it's always the best choice to try and get back to the customer.
You know, I'm sorry, go on.
No, please, Joe, go ahead.
I was recently setting up a new internet service, and it took 2.5 months for me to set it up. From the time when it was supposed to be set up, let's say there was a date that was agreed with the carrier, the internet service provider. It took them 2.5 months to the point where they could tell me what my account number was. And it got to the point where I was in the store. I won't mention the company's name. I was in the store and I was talking to the customer service person, and he said to me, "Look, if our systems are so bad, if we can't get this to work, I'm going to recommend that you go to another provider. You go to one of our competitors." They're just not focused around the customers. In any case, that's a side story.
And but I had another similar story. I am working with a bank on a piece of real estate that I own and refinancing it.
Yep.
And trying to get it refinanced and trying to get it done. And I wanted a couple of changes that were reasonable based on the situation. When I first bought it, there was no tenant. Now there's a tenant. So the needs for the financing are different. Trying to get them to change it, they couldn't do it. Finally, the guy said, "Kevin, you're probably better to go to one of our competitors."
Yeah.
And he gave me a name, and I got names from somewhere else. So I go to the competitor. Not only is the interest rate 30 basis points lower, they turned around, and I was going back and forth with this other one for about a month. The existing bank that already has my business, the new one, turned the whole thing around in, I think, 7 days. And at a better rate, and better rate and some other terms. And they made the changes that would be normal to do. So here's a bank that lost a chunk of business. And it's just, and the guy actually told me to go somewhere else because he says that his people were just being silly about it because of the changes, because it's like they like to follow the process.
Yep.
And anyway, it's fascinating, and then people are worried and thinking about it. Well, at the end of the day, when you're letting customers leave like that, when there's no need for it, where's your focus on your customer? And they're all trying their hardest. They are trying, but it's challenging sometimes.
Okay, so let's move to review. So number one is there is a dangerous thing about focusing on your competition. And that is, if you're focused on your competition, you might not be focusing on the customer, A, and B, the customer's needs, more importantly. So we've got to understand our competition is point number one. We've got to understand, what are the competition doing? What are they good at? And what are they not good at? And that should be allocated in a disciplined manner within your strategic planning process. Number two is if you don't do this, you could end up as a commodity. You could just follow and replicate what the competitors are doing. And the risk is that that obsession means that you're just a follower and it's just driving the prices down. And then number three is, think about the Pareto rule. Think about your teams. Think about yourself. Think about the leadership team. How much of the time is spent focusing on customers instead of focusing on competitors? And know that Kevin's advocating for 2%. I'm just simply advocating, understand the number and think about the Pareto rule. What if you flipped it? What if you spent most of your time focusing on the customers and the customer's needs? Kevin, do you want to move on to number four?
Yeah, and taking that extra energy you have on your customer, or maybe you're already doing this right, but think about how do you better improve your customer experience so that it's easier for customers to transact with you and be thrilled at the end. And then number five, other products and services that you could be providing to those customers. How can you further help them and make their world better because you have some things that will enhance their business and help them to perform better?
Very good.
It's pretty straightforward. The competition is important. but not that important.
And to maintain that, as we've already said a few times, think about the 4 questions. It's a simple 5-minute survey that we advocate. And again, we did that. We discussed that in episode 78 of the Growth Whisperers. So this has been the Growth Whisperers. My name is Brad Giles, as always, joined by Kevin Lawrence. You can find me at evolutionpartners.com.au, and you can find Kevin at lawrenceandco.com. Don't forget, please do click the subscribe button, and we'd love to have you as a regular listener. And thanks very much for listening. We look forward to chatting again next week.